in a scene whose waters had turned crimson elephants, once proud and majestic, now lay still their bodies, bathed in the lifeblood of their fallen comrades as the battle raged on. Brave warriors from both armies fought on, each seeking glory and victory above all else. Their cries filled the air as they clashed with one another, their armor battered and broken, their bodies scared by the relentless onslaught. Yet neither side wavered in its determination to emerge victorious, their wills unbroken like the mountains themselves. In this maelstrom of steel and blood Abhimanyu stood tall, his spirit unshaken as he fought on against overwhelming odds. His name would go down in his story as one of the bravest. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a reddish hue over the battlefield as King Duryodhana, fueled by his desire for battle, charged towards Bhima. The air was electric with tension as the two warriors clashed, their animosity towards each other palpable. Bhima's eyes blazed with fury as he beheld Duryodhana approaching him. The hour of reckoning has finally come, he declared, his voice dripping with venom. Leave this battle now and spare your life, for I have longed to slay you these many years. Bhima's words were laced with the pain and suffering that Duryodhana had inflicted upon him during their exile, and the force as he spoke Bhima's hands moved swiftly, drawing his bowstring taut as he took aim. 32 arrows shot forth from his quiver, each one streaking towards Duryodhana like a blazing comet. The king's charioteer was struck twice, and his steeds were sent tumbling to the ground, their bodies disappearing into the afterlife. Duryodhana himself was pierced by 2 arrows, which seemed to dance around him like lightning bolts. Bhima's aim was true, and with each shot Duryodhana felt a searing pain coursing through his body. His umbrella and standard were cut down, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. The battle raged on. Abhimanyu, the son of Suvadra, entered the fray, his bow singing as he unleashed a hail of arrows at the Kaurava warriors. Vikarna was struck by 4 broad-headed shafts, each one piercing his armor like a snake's fang. His standard fell to the ground, and with it his charioteer and steeds. Jayadratha, determined to slay Bhima, surrounded him with thousands of cars. But Abhimanyu stood firm, firing arrow after arrow at the enemy lines. The Kekayas and the sons of Draupadi joined the fray, their arrows flying like rain towards the Kaurava warriors. As the battle reached its crest and Dharnuka clashed with Srutikarman, their bows singing as they exchanged blows, Sutisama entered the fray, his car upbore as he rushed to support his comrades. The air was filled with the sound of clashing steel and the scent of blood as the two armies clashed. In the midst of this chaos, Satnak stood tall, his bow firing arrow after arrow at Jayatsena. Dashkarna joined the fray, cutting off Satnak's bow and arrow. But the young warrior refused to yield. With a new bow in hand, he unleashed a hail of arrows at Dashkarna, each one striking true. The fight raged on. 5 Kekaya brothers surrounded Satanak, their arrows flying towards him like a storm. But just as the sun had set on the battlefield, casting a golden glow over the carnage, Pandavas and Kauravas, their armor battered and bloodstained, retreated to their camps to rest and regroup. But even as they praised each other's bravery, their eyes gleamed with a fierce determination to return to battle. Duryodhana, his face twisted in anguish, approached Bhishma, his grandfather and the greatest warrior of the Kauravas. His son's eyes were sunken, his skin pale, and his voice trembled as he spoke. Our troops are formidable, but those Pandava warriors have pierced our lines like a storm wind. They've slaughtered our men with ease, leaving us reeling in their wake. He paused, his chest heaving with emotion. Even I was struck by Bhima's arrows, and for a moment I lost all sense of reason. Bhishma listened attentively, his eyes filled with compassion. His voice, like a gentle breeze on a summer day, soothed Duryodhana's frayed nerves. I will not deceive you, my prince, he said, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. The Pandavas are indeed formidable opponents. Their army is vast and fierce with mighty warriors from across the land. But I will not falter in this battle. For your sake, I will risk everything, even my own life. Duryodhana's eyes lit up with hope as he listened to Bhishma's words. His anxiety dissipated, replaced by a newfound confidence. I will fight alongside you, he declared, his voice ringing across the camp. Together we will defeat these Pandavas and claim victory. With Bhishma leading the charge, the Kaurava army began to stir, their banners fluttering in the wind as they advanced towards the battlefield. Elephants, steeds, foot soldiers, and chariots formed the vast sea of warriors, their armor glinting like stars on a clear night. The air was filled with the thunder of drums, the clash of steel on steel, and the cries of battle-hardened warriors as the armies clashed the dust kicked up by the feet of horses and elephants created a reddish-brown haze that obscured the sun's rays. Banners waved high above the fray, their colors flashing like lightning in the sky. The sound of clashing steel echoed through the air, mingling with the roar of drums to create a cacophony of war. The battlefield was ablaze with color and energy, as if the very fabric of reality had been torn apart by the conflict. Warriors from both sides fought on their faces, set in fierce determination, their hearts burning with a desire for victory in this maelstrom of steel and blood. Only one outcome seemed certain, that the war would rage on until only one side remained standing. The sun was setting over the battlefield, casting a golden glow over the army of the Dhritarashtra's. Duryodhana, the son of King Dhritarashtra, sat on his chariot, resplendent in his armor and looking every bit like the god Indra himself. Sanjaya, the wise old sage, stood before him, his eyes filled with a deep concern. "My lord," Sanjaya said gently, "I must tell you that your army is strong, but it is no match for the Pandavas. They have Vasudeva on their side, and they are as skilled in battle as Indra himself. I fear for our safety." My king Duryodhana scoffed at Sanjaya's words, but deep down he knew that his father's words were true. He had seen the prowess of Arjuna, the Pandavas' greatest warrior, and he knew that they would not be easily defeated. Sanjaya continued to speak, his voice filled with a sense of urgency. "I have told you before, my king, that I will always tell you what is best for you, and what is best for you now is to prepare for battle. The Pandavas are coming, and they will not be easily defeated." Duryodhana nodded, his face set in determination. Sanjaya handed him a small pouch containing a powerful herb, one that would heal any wound. "Take this, my king," he said. "It may come in handy." Sulis, the sun dipped below the horizon. Bhishma, the grandsire of the Dhritarashtras, began to prepare for battle. He was an old man, but his spirit was still strong, and he knew that he would have to lead the charge against the Pandavas. With a mighty roar, the army of the Dhritarashtras charged forward, their chariots thundering across the battlefield. Bhishma led the way, his armor shining in the fading light. The army was arrayed in a magnificent formation, with thousands of warriors and elephants at its center. As they approached the Pandavas' lines, the two armies clashed in a deafening roar of steel on steel. Arjuna, the greatest warrior of them all, stood tall on his chariot, his bow singing as he shot arrow after arrow into the fray. The battle raged on for hours, with neither side giving an inch. But slowly the Pandavas began to gain ground. Bhishma fought valiantly, but even he could not hold back the tide of Arjuna's arrows. One by one the Dhritarashtra's warriors felt their armor shattered and their bodies broken. As the sun rose higher in the sky, the battle reached its climax. Arjuna stood tall on his chariot, his bow singing with every shot. The Dhritarashtra's the battle raged on, its fury unabated as Suzarman ceased fighting, and the Kuru warriors were routed by Arjuna's unyielding prowess. The Asim-like army of Duryodhana, witnessing Partha's unmatched skill, began to tremble with fear. King Duryodhana, beholding his enemy's invincibility, rallied his troops and addressed them, saying, "Let us protect our grandsire, Bhishma, who is resolute in fighting against the Pandavas." Bhishma, the son of Santanu, rushed towards Arjuna on his magnificent chariot, its white steeds and standard bearing the fire scepter. As he approached, the opposing army beheld Ananjaya's diadem-decked figure, and their voices rose in a cacophony of fear. Krishna, reins in hand, shone like the midday sun, while Arjuna's resplendent chariot seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly light. The warriors on both sides gazed upon each other in awe, their eyes unable to meet Bhishma's piercing stare or Ananjaya's radiant presence. Meanwhile the battle raged on elsewhere, as Bharadwaja's son pierced the king of Matsas with winged arrows, cutting down his standard, and Bhavarata, commander of a large division, took up another bow and prepared to face Drona in combat. The great Brahmana warrior was enraged by Virata's actions and slew his steeds with 8 straight shafts. As the battle raged on, Drona pierced Virata's charioteer with 1 arrow, and then his chariot itself sank, and a mighty car warrior clashed with Drona's son in that fierce combat. The two warriors exchanged blows, their arrows flying swiftly through the air. As they battled on, Aswathaman, enraged by Sikandin's attacks, overthrew his charioteer and standard, covering them with myriads of shafts. Sikandin leaped down from his car, sword in hand, and moved onto the field like a hawk. He cut through the fire shower of arrows coming towards him, but Aswathaman eventually managed to pierce his shield and sword. Sikandin hurled the broken blade at Aswathaman, who displayed the lightness of his arms by cutting it off in mid-air. Aswathaman Then pierced Sicandon with numerous iron arrows, leaving him severely afflicted. Seikai, a high-souled of Mada's race, arrived on the Seine and clashed with the Lamvusha, a prince of Rakshasas. The battle raged on as both warriors exchanged blows, their arrows flying swiftly through the air. Seikai eventually applied the Indra weapon, which consumed a Lamvusha's illusion and covered him. The sun beat down upon the battlefield as Dhritarashtra, king of the Kurus, gazed out at the carnage before him. He turned to his charioteer Sanjaya and asked, "Many and wonderful are the single commits I hear thee speak of between my warriors and those of the Pandavas. Yet thus speakest not of any one of mine who has been cheerful in battle." Sanjaya looked at him with a hint of sadness in his eyes and replied, "Your men exert themselves according to their might and courage, O king. But when they come into contact with the heroic sons of Pandu, their valor becomes futile. It is not their fault that they are vanquished." As Sanjaya spoke, the battle raged on. The two princes of Avanti, those great bowmen endued with exceeding might, beheld Airavat and advanced against him. The battle between them was fierce, making the hair stand on end. Airavat, excited with rage, quickly pierced the two brothers with many sharp and straight shafts, but they, conversant with all modes of warfare, pierced him in return. The fight continued with neither side giving an inch. Then Airavat dispatched the 4 steeds of Anuvinda to the abode of Yama with 4 swift shafts with a couple of sharp broad-headed shafts. He cut off the bow and standard of Anuvinda. The feat seemed highly wonderful, but Sanjaya merely observed that it was the natural course of events. As the battle raged on, the mighty son of Heruva, that prince of Rakshasas, rushed against Vegadata, ruler of the Praegyudish, as the two warriors flashed in a fierce engagement with neither gaining the upper hand. But then Gatotkaca, that mighty car warrior, covered Vegadata with his arrows like the clouds pouring rain on the breast of Maruvagadata. However, was not easily vanquished. He hurled 14 lances at Gatotkaca, but they were all cut off by the Rakshasas' sharp shafts. Then Vegadata pierced Gatotkaca with 70 shafts, each resembling the thunderbolt in force. But the mighty armed Rakshasa wavered not at all. Meanwhile, the ruler of the Madras engaged in battle with his sister's sons, the twins. He overwhelmed them with clouds of arrows, but Sahadeva covered him with arrows like the clouds covering the maker of day. The twin brothers felt great delight for their mother as they fought bravely against their unclease. The battle raged on. Celia, that mighty car warrior, smaying effectively in that battle, dispatched with 4 excellent shafts. The sun had reached its peak in the sky when King Yudhishthira, son of Dharma, urged his steeds forward. He spotted Srutiash, a formidable warrior, and with 9 swift arrows struck him with precision. But Srutiash was not one to be easily defeated. He countered by firing 7 arrows at Yudhishthira, which pierced through his armor and drank in the vital energies within his body. Yudhishthira's anger flared up like a raging fire at the end of an era, consuming all in its path. The gods began harvest, and Rakshasas trembled with fear as the universe became agitated. Even the rishis and celestials prayed for peace to be restored to the world fueled by his wrath. Yudhishthira's expression turned fierce like the sun rising at the end of a yuga. His warriors, including Chaitanya, Gautama, and Karakasha, fought valiantly alongside him. However, as the battle raged on, Srutiash was eventually vanquished by Yudhishthira's arrows. The king then turned his attention to the rest of Duryodhana's army. Chaitanya, a skilled warrior from the Satwata race, fought bravely, but was eventually cut down by Kripa Sharparo. Chaitanya drew his mace and struck at Gautama, but the latter countered with thousands of arrows, checking the mass moment to as the battle intensified. Both Chaitanya and Gautama fell to the ground exhausted from their efforts. Karakursha and Sikana rushed to their aid, lifting them onto their chariots in full view of the troops. Meanwhile, Drashtaktu, a mighty car warrior, clashed with Samadata's son. The latter was pierced by 90 sharp arrows, but continued to shine like the sun at midday. Virasrevas eventually deprived Drashtaktu of his chariot and steeds, covering him in a hail of arrows. Of Abhimanyu, the brave son of Subhadra, fought valiantly against Chitrisna, Laikarna, Durmarshana, and other warriors from Duryodhana's army. Though outnumbered, Abhimanyu managed to defeat their charioteers, but spared his opponents' lives. As per Bhima's words, as the battle reached its climax, Arjuna, with his white steeds, drove towards the fray. He addressed Vasudeva, urging him to guide the horses towards the enemy lines. With Arjuna leading the charge, a loud uproar erupted among Duryodhana's troops as they faced off against the Pandavas. The battle raged on with blood flowing like water as warriors clashed in a frenzy of steel and arrows. The sun beat down on the battlefield as Arjuna, the mighty Dhananjaya, stood tall amidst the chaos. His armor glistened with dew, and his Gandava bow sang its familiar song as he drew back the stringy enemy warriors. A formidable force of Kar warriors from the Trigartas charged towards him, their bows at the ready. Air was filled with the sound of clashing steel and the scent of sway and blood as Arjuna unleashed his arrows upon them. His aim was true, and one by one the enemy warriors fell to the ground, their bows shattered, and their armor pierced. The high-souled Arjuna, driven by a fierce determination, cut down the enemy with ease, his arrows flying swift and deadly. As the battle raged on, the ruler of the Trigartas, a mighty warrior in his own right, advanced towards Arjuna with a force of 32 Kar warriors. They surrounded him, their bows singing as they poured a hail of arrows upon him. But Arjuna was not one to be intimidated. With 60 arrows steeped in oil, he repelled the enemy and sent them tumbling to the ground. The battlefield was now a scene of utter chaos, with warriors on both sides fighting for their lives. The Pandavas, led by Yudhishthira, fought valiantly, but they were vastly outnumbered. Arjuna, however, remained steadfast, his focus fixed on Bhishma, the son of Ganga, and Santanus. The battle raged on. Jayadratha, a king from the Sindhas, charged towards Yudhishthira with 500 arrows, each one resembling the rod of death. But Bhishma, undaunted by the danger, rushed forward to confront him. The two warriors clashed in midair, their masses meeting with a resounding crash. Meanwhile, Sikandin, the son of Drupada, had been watching the battle unfold from a distance. He was filled with anger and shame at his own inability to slay Bhishma, despite having vowed to do so. Ajatasattu, the king of Magadha, approached him and chided him for his courtesy. "You are a man of great valor," Ajatasattu said, "but you have failed in your duty. You have abandoned your kinsmen and brothers in their time of need." Your face is pale with fear, and I can see that you are trembling with anxiety hearing these words. Sikandin's anger boiled over, and he vowed to slay Bhishma once and for all with renewed determination. He charged towards the enemy lines, his Varuna weapon at the readiest. He approached Salya, the king of Madra, emerged from the fray, his own weapons blazing with fury. But Sikandin, the sun beat down on the battlefield as the armies of the Pandavas and Kauravas clashed in a frenzy of steel and sweet. Sanjaya, the chronicler of the battle, watched with a keen eye as the two forces engaged. As the fight raged on, Yudhishthira, the eldest of the Pandava brothers, spotted Bhishma, the mighty warrior, son of Santanu, charging towards him like a lion. Bhishma's arrows rained down upon Yudhishthira, but the latter's own bow sang with deadly precision as he shot arrow after arrow at the Kaurava leader. The battle was fierce and chaotic, with both sides trading blows and neither gaining the upper hand. The Srinjayas trembled at Bhishma's approach, while the Pandavas rallied around their leader, determined to bring him down. As the fight intensified, Yudhishthira grew more enraged, his eyes blazing with a fierce determination to vanquish Bhishma. He shot arrow after arrow, but Bhishma, undaunted, continued to rain down shafts upon the Pandava prince. Kauravas, led by Duryodhana and supported by their powerful allies, fought valiantly alongside Bhishma. Drona, the great teacher of arms, and his son, along with Kripa and Salya, surrounded the whole army, cutting down any who dared to stand in their way. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the battlefield, Arjuna emerged victorious from a fire duel against the kings headed by Sazarman. He made his way back to his tent, followed closely by Yudhishthira and Bhishma, who had vanquished their own. Whilst the Kauravas, still surrounding Bhishma, retreated towards their tents. As night began to fall, the battlefield grew quiet, except for the distant howling of jackals and the ominous presence of Rakshasas and Pysakas lurking in the shadows. As darkness descended upon the land, both armies ceased hostilities, their brave warriors wary but unbroken. They retired to their tents, applauding one another's bravery as they made preparations for the next day's battle. The war between the Pandavas and Kauravas would continue, fueled by pride, honor, and a thirst for victory. The night air was heavy with tension, the only sound being the soft murmur of soldiers settling into their tents, their eyes fixed on the horizon, ready to face whatever dawn might bring. The sun had barely risen over the vast expanse of the battlefield, casting a golden glow over the armies of the Kauravas and the Pandavas. The air was electric with anticipation as the two forces prepared to clash once more. King Duryodhana, his eyes ablaze with determination, stood at the forefront of the Kaurava army, flanked by his brothers and the mighty Bhishma, the son of Santanus. The troops began to form their lines. A deafening roar echoed across the battlefield like the crashing of waves against the shore. The standards of the two armies rose high into the air, their collars shining brightly in the morning light. The sound of drums and clinches pierced the air, mingling with the shouts of the warriors. As they prepared to face each other, the Kaurava army was a formidable sight to behold, its ranks comprising some of the greatest warriors of the land, including Bhishma, Drauma's son, and the brave Trigarta. The Pandavas, led by Yudhishthira, formed their own array, with Arjuna at its center, his charioteer Krishna guiding him through the chassis. The two armies faced each other. A sense of tension hung in the air. The warriors, their eyes fixed intently on one another, began to advance towards the enemy lines. The first challenge was made, and the battle commenced with a ferocity that shook the very foundations of the earth. The clash of steel on steel, the thud of elephants' trunks crashing into each other, and the cries of the wounded filled the air as the two armies engaged in a struggle that would decide the fate of the kingdom. Bhishma, his bow singing with deadly precision, cut down the Pandava warriors like wheat before a scythe. The Pandavas, undaunted by the carnage around them, fought on with all their might. The mighty warrior approached Bhishma, determined to put an end to the slaughter. The two gents clashed in a frenzy of steel and fury, their battle echoing across the battlefield like thunderous. The fight raged on. King Duryodhana watched anxiously from his chariot, his brothers surrounding him, protecting him from harm. But despite their bravery, the Kauravas were slowly gaining ground, their losses mounting as Bhishma continued to wreak havoc among the Pandava ranks. In a desperate bid to turn the tide of battle, Arjuna and Satyaki led a charge against Bhishma's lines, but the old warrior was unstoppable. His arrows flew swift and true, cutting down the Pandavas like wheat before a set. Of the battlefield was a scene of utter chaos, with warriors falling left and right as the two armies clashed in a frenzy of steel and furious. The sun began to set on the battlefield, casting long shadows. The sun was setting over the vast battlefield, casting a golden glow over the clash of steel and the thunder of hooves. Sanjaya, the narrator, stood by King Dhritarashtra's side, recounting the tale of the fierce battle between the Pandavas and the Kauravas. As the battle raged on, Sakanai, the son of Suvala, rode forth against the Pandavas, his steeds' hooves pounding the earth with a rhythmic beat. He was followed by Hridika's son, a skilled warrior from the Setwata clan, who charged into the fray with a fierce cry. The sound of clashing steel and the scent of sweat and blood filled the air as the two armies clashed. Meanwhile, in the celestial realm of Indra, Arjuna's son Airava had arrived, eager to join his father on the battlefield. He was a handsome young man, strong and skilled in the arts of war, with a fierce determination burning within him. As he approached his father, he saluted him with joined hands, introducing himself as Airava, the son of Arjuna. Arjuna's eyes lit up with joy as he recognized his son, and he welcomed him warmly into the fray. He commanded Airava to render assistance when the battle took place, and the young warrior set off with a large number of swift steeds at his command. As they charged into the battlefield, their horses' hooves thundered against those of the Kaurava forces, causing chaos and destruction. The clash between the two armies was fierce and intense, with warriors on both sides fighting valiantly. Airava's division was particularly effective, with its swift steeds and skilled riders cutting through the Kaurava lines like a hot knife through butter. The son of Arjuna fought with incredible ferocity, his sword slishing through the enemy ranks with deadly precision. But despite their bravery, the Kaurava forces were not to be underestimated. Sakanai's sons Gaya, Gavicha, Vrishava, Charmava, Arjava, and Sukha rode forth from the Kaurava array, their steeds' hooves pounding the earth. As they charged into battle, they were supported by a large force of skilled warriors clad in mail and armed with lances. The battle raged on for what seemed like hours, with neither side giving an inch. Airava's division fought bravely, but the Kaurava forces were relentless, determined to crush their enemies beneath their feet. The young warrior was wounded deeply, his chest, back, and flanks pierced by multiple arrows. But he refused to yield us. The battle reached its climax. Airava unsheathed his polished sword and charged into the fray on foot, determined to slay his foes. His enemies surrounded him closely, but he fought with incredible ferocity. His sword the sun beat down on the battlefield as Dhritarashtra, king of Hastinapura, sought to know about the deeds of his son Duryodhana. He turned to Sanjaya, his charioteer and advisor, and asked him to recount the events that had transpired. When Airava, a mighty warrior, was slain, Sanjaya began his tale, describing how Ghathapika, the righteous son of Vemmasna, let out thunderous roars upon hearing of his father's demise. The earth shook violently as if it were being ravaged by a storm, and the very mountains and forests trembled with fear. The armies of Duryodhana's troops quaked in their boots, their limbs trembling like leaves in the wind as Ghatotkacha continued to bellow, his form transformed into that of a fearsome destroyer, blazing with fury and wielding a spear as bright as lightning. His eyes blazed with an inner fire, and he was surrounded by a retinue of fires, Rakshasas, each one armed with their own unique arsenal of deadly weapons. Duryodhana, undaunted by the sight before him, rushed forward to confront Ghatotkacha, his bow singing with arrows, as he let out a mighty roar that echoed across the battlefield. Behind him came the ruler of the Vengas, accompanied by an army of elephants as massive as hills, each one glistening with dew and ready for battle. Ghatotkacha's rage was now at its peak, and he hurled himself at Duryodhana like a storm unleashed upon the world. The two armies clashed in a maelstrom of steel and blood, their cries echoing through the valleys as they fought on. Ghatotkacha's Rakshasas charged forward with a ferocity that shook the very foundations of the earth, their roars thundering like 1,000 drums beating out a warlike rhythmus. The battle raged on. Duryodhana let loose a hail of arrows at the Rakshasa. Post his aim true and deadly, he struck down 4 of Ghatotkacha's most formidable warriors with a single volley, their bodies crashing to the ground like trees felled by an axe. The great bowman then unleashed another torrent of arrows, each one biting deep into the flesh of his enemies. But Duryodhana's triumph was short-lived, for Bhishma's son Ghatotkacha was not one to be easily vanquished. Enraged by the sight of his father slain and his kin suffering at the hands of Duryodhana, he hurled himself forward like a force of nature unleashed upon the world. With eyes blazing with fury, Ghatotkacha drew his massive bow at strings, singing with tension as he prepared to unleash a final devastating blow. I shall today be freed from the debt. The sun was setting over the battlefield, casting a golden glow over the chaos. Below, Sanjaya watched with a mixture of awe and trepidation as the mighty Duryodhana, son of Dhritarashtra, bore the brunt of the enemy's attack like an elephant bearing a stormy shore. As the battle raged on, Duryodhana's anger grew, and he shot sharp arrows that pierced the body of Ghatotkacha, the powerful Rakshasa. The latter's heart burned with fury, and he took up a massive dart that blazed like a meteor, its radiance illuminating the darkening sky. Ghatotkacha hurled the dart at Bhagadata, the king of Vengas, who was riding an elephant as large as a hill. The mighty animal charged towards Duryodhana's chariot, but Ghatotkacha ruled his emotions and shot the dart with precision, striking the elephant down. The Bhagadata jumped off the fallen elephant and landed on the ground, but his troops were broken and fleeing in terror. Duryodhana beheld the prince of elephants slain and his own men retreating, and he felt a surge of anguish wash over him. Yet driven by duty and pride as a Kshatriya, he stood firm like a hill, refusing to yield. Ghatotkacha, enraged by Bhagadata's death, shot a sharp arrow that resembled the youth fire and energy at Duryodhana. But the latter's mighty warrior Sanjaya was quick to reach and spotted Ghatotkacha's attack. He shouted a warning to Bhishma, who approached him with grave concern. These fire roars, Bhishma said, indicate that Hidimba's son is battling with King Duryodhana, that Rakshasa is incapable of being vanquished in battle by any creature. With these words, the mighty Kar warriors hastened to protect their king, and a fierce battle commenced between Ghatotkacha's forces and Duryodhana's division. The clash of steel on steel echoed through the battlefield as lances soared through the air like darting snakes. Ghatotkacha's wrath knew no bounds as he cut down Samadata's standard with one broad-headed arrow, pierced Valaka's chest with 3 shafts, and struck Kripa with a single arrow. The prince of Rakshasas continued his rampage, slaying Urasravas with multiple arrows that entered the earth, striking Vivansa's chariot and cutting off Jayadratha's bow. He slew the 4 steeds of King Vrayapala and pierced the latter himself with a well-tempered arrow. As the battle raged on, Ghatotkacha shot many bright arrows that resembled snakes of virulent poison piercings. The sun beat down upon the battlefield of Kurukshetra, casting a golden glow over the chaos that was about to unfold. Sanjaya watched as Ghatotkacha, the mighty Rakshasa, son of Hidimba, charged forward with reckless abandon, his eyes blazing with fury. The Dhritarashtra army, still reeling from the earlier battle, stumbled backward in disarray as Ghatotkacha bore down on Duryodhana. The king's own warriors rallied to his side, drawing their bows and unleashing a hail of arrows that rained down upon the Rakshasa like autumnal rain. The air was filled with the scent of blood, and sweet as Ghatotkacha fought valiantly, his roars echoing across the battlefield like thunder, but despite being outnumbered, Gatotkaca held his ground, dodging and weaving between the arrows that pierced his body. His cries grew louder, still shattering the very fabric of the atmosphere, until he soared up into the air like Garud, a mighty eagle-like creature from Hindu mythology. The battle raged on. Yudhishthira, the wise and just king of the Pandavas, watched with growing concern. He knew that Gatotkaca was in grave danger, surrounded by the enemy's forces as he was summoning them. His loyal brother to his side, Yudhishthira, issued a command, "Go Vrikadara. Give aid to Hedimva's son, who is beset on all sides by our enemies." Bhima sprang into action, racing across the battlefield with his loyal companions at his heels. Sahidratai Sakchatai Srinamat Basudana, and of the many led the charge, their war cries echoing through the air as they bore down on Gatotkaca's position. The arrival of these reinforcements was like a storm breaking over the battlefield. The Dhritarashtra army wavered their lines, beginning to break as them and his charades pressed forward with unyielding ferocity. Elephants flashed with elephants, horses with steeds, and men with men. In the maelstrom of Chalcis the battle raged on. Sanjaya watched in awe, his words barely able to keep pace with the events unfolding before him. The earth trembled beneath their feet. He exclaimed as Bhima's army advanced upon Gatotkaca's position, their war cries and the clash of steel on steel creating a cacophony that shook the very foundations of the battlefield. In the midst of this chaos, warriors from both sides flashed in a frenzy of bloodlust and fury. The air was filled with the scent of death and destruction as men, elephants, and horses fell to the ground, their bodies broken and mangled beyond recognition. And yet amidst the sun beat down on the battlefield as King Duryodhana's wrath boiled over at the sight of his own troops falling to Bhima's mighty blows. He charged towards the Pandava warrior, his large bow shining like Indra's thunderbolt, and unleashed a hail of arrows that rained down upon them. The son of Pandu, pierced by Duryodhana's sharp crescent-shaped shaft, stumbled but refused to yield as Bhima struggled to regain his footing. Gatotkaca, the mighty Rakshasa, was filled with fury at the sight of his father in distress. He leaped into battle surrounded by his kin and charged towards Drola's son Aswathaman. The air grew thick with the sound of clashing steel as warriors from both sides clashed. Bhima, still reeling from Duryodhana's arrow, seized his flagstaff and stood firm like a mountain, ready to face whatever came next. King Duryodhana and Aswathaman rushed towards him, their faces twisted with rage. Bhima, undaunted, charged forward, his mass at the readiest. The battle raged on. Many mighty warriors from both sides joined the fray of the many, led a charge of Pandavas determined to protect and drive back the Kauravas. The Dhritarashtras, however, refused to yield, and their warriors clashed with the Pandavas in a frenzy of steel and arrows. Bhima's strength was formidable, but he was soon surrounded by Drona's son and other great bowmen from the Kaurava army. They hurled diverse kinds of weapons at him, seeking to bring him down just when it seemed Bhima would be overwhelmed. Nile, the heroic ruler of the low country, and a dear friend of Bhima, rushed into battle. Two warriors clashed in a spectacular display of archery, their arrows flying swift and true as they exchanged blows. Drola's son was pierced by Nile's well-shot arrows, just as he had once defeated the invisible Danava. Viprachita, enraged Aswathaman, drew his own bow and hurled a few bright shafts at Nilus. The battle reached its climax. Gatotkaca unleashed a fierce delusion that confounded Drona's son and sent the Kaurava army into chaos. The warriors on both sides saw each other fall, their horses and horse riders cut down, and thousands panicked, set in as the Kauravas fled towards their tents despite Devavrata and Sanjaya's cries to stand firm against the illusion. The Kaurava army refused to listen. They fled in all directions, abandoning the battlefield to the Pandavas. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the sound of lilin shouts echoed. The sun was setting over the battlefield, casting a golden glow over the carnage. King Duryodhana approached Bhishma, his grandsire, with humility and respect. The king's eyes were downcast, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He began to recount the tale of his victory, but it was a whole triumph, for he had been defeated by the Pandavas. Bhishma listened attentively, his expression somber. When Duryodhana finished speaking, Bhishma's words were like a gentle breeze on a summer day, as soothing and calming. "My dear king," he said, "one must always protect oneself in battle. It is not wise to seek victory at any cost." Duryodhana looked up, his eyes pleading for guidance. "Bhishma, continued, you should fight against the Pandavas as a king with honor and integrity. If you wish to defeat Katakaka, I will give you my blessing. But first let us see if we can find another warrior who is worthy of facing him Megadata. The mighty king of Pragjyotishes was summoned to the battlefield. Bhishma spoke to him in a voice that echoed across the plains. Go forth, the great monarch, face Katakaka in battle, and show him your prowess. With a mighty roar, Megadata set out on his elephant Sapretai. The beast was a marvel of strength and speed. Its temples rent by arrows, his body glistening with the juice of its wounds. Megadata rode it like a charioteer guiding a speeding chariot, scattering arrows from its head. Like a storm cloud, the battle raged on, with warriors on both sides clashing in a frenzy of steel, and flame elephants trumpeted their fury as they clashed, their tusks tearing into each other's flesh. The sound of leonine roars echoed across the battlefield, mingling with the cries of the wounded. Megadata charged towards Bhimesna, his arrows flying like raindrops from a storm cloud. But Bhima was not one to be defeated easily. He shot back a hail of arrows that sent Megadata's warriors scattering. The king himself laughed in triumph as he pierced Megadata with an arrow. The battle raged on, with both sides trading blows and neither gaining the upper hand. The earth shook beneath their feet as the elephants clashed, their trunks entwined like serpents. The sound of drums echoed across the plains, beating out a rhythm that seemed to match the pounding of hearts in chests. Finally, after what seemed an eternity, Megadata's elephant was vanquished, it fled in terror, crushing the Pandava ranks beneath its feet. The warriors cheered as they gave chase, their arrows and lances flashing in the sunlight. The sun beat down upon the battle-scared field as Dhananjaya, Arjuna, beheld his son Airavat's death. Overwhelmed with grief, he sighed like a snake and addressed Vasava Krishna. In the midst of the raging battle, slayer of Madhu, Arjuna said, I see now that Vidura, and foreseen this destruction of our families. He warned Dhritarashtra against it, but alas, his words fell on deaf ears. For the sake of wealth, we are slaughtering each other's kin. Fie upon that wealth. I would rather die and bring shame to my family by such actions. Krishna listened attentively as Arjuna continued, this battle with our kinsmen is distasteful to me. I am fighting only because I must prove myself in battle, for the Kshatriyas will not regard me powerless if I do not participate. I urge you, Krishna, let us hasten towards the Dhritarashtra army. We must reach them before it's too late. Krishna nodded and urged his white steeds forward. With a gentle touch of his hand, the sound of their hooves echoed through the battlefield like thunder on a stormy day. As they approached the fray, Bhima, Arjuna's brother, clashed with Bhishma, the grandsire of the Kurus. Bhishma was surrounded by his sons, who rushed to defend him against Bhimesna's onslaught. But Bhima, fueled by rage and grief, fought valiantly, felling son after son of Dhritarashtra. Megadata, Gautama, and other mighty warriors tried to resist Arjuna, but he proved too formidable, dispatching them with ease. Abhimanyu, Subhadra's son, also distinguished himself in battle, shooting down King Yamashta from his chariot. The fighting raged on, with both sides trading blows and neither gaining the upper hand. Warriors clashed, their swords ringing out as they battled for victory. The earth was strewn with the bodies of slain steeds, men, and elephants. But still the battle continued, fueled by pride, honor, and duty. The sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the battlefield. The warriors fought on, their movements swift and deadly. It seemed as though the very gods themselves had descended upon the earth, each warrior driven by his own personal demons and motivations. In this maelstrom of violence, Arjuna stood tall, his spirit unbroken despite the carnage around him. He knew that he was fighting not just for himself or his family, but for the future of their kingdom and the honor of the Kshatriya caste. In the midst of the great war, King Duryodhana, son of Dhritarashtra, and his advisors Sakanai and Karna convened a meeting to discuss a crucial strategy. Their objective was to vanquish the Pandavas, led by Arjuna, who had been gaining strength in battle despite being outnumbered. Duryodhana expressed his frustration and concern that Bhishma, the revered son of Ganga, was showing mercy towards the Pandavas. He believed that if Bhishma were to withdraw from the battle, Karna would be able to single-handedly defeat the Pandavas. Duryodhana entrusted Karna with the task of persuading Bhishma to lay down his arms and retire from the fight. Karna accepted the challenge and set out to meet Bhishma. He was accompanied by his brothers, including Dasasana, who had adorned him in fine attire complete with golden ornaments and fragrant sandalwood. Passed as they journeyed towards Bhishma's quarters. They were surrounded by a retinue of mighty bowmen, bards, and attendants. Upon arriving at Bhishma's presence, Duryodhana dismounted his horse and saluted the venerable warrior. He sat down on a golden throne, his eyes brimming with tears. As he implored Bhishma to show mercy towards him, he begged Bhishma to slay the Pandavas, just as Mahendra had vanquished the Danavas. Bhishma, however, remained silent, his face twisted in anguish as Duryodhana's words pierced his heart like daggers. For a long while he reflected on Duryodhana's words, his eyes burning with an inner fire. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm and tranquil, reminding Duryodhana that the Pandavas were indeed invincible. Bhishma recounted several instances where Arjuna had demonstrated his bravery and prowess in battle, vanquishing even Bhishma himself on occasion. He reminded Duryodhana that it was futile to try to defeat the Pandavas, and instead urged him to seek a different path. However, Duryodhana remained resolute in his determination to defeat the Pandavas, shutting his lips and refusing to listen to further counsels. The meeting concluded. Bhishma's silence spoke volumes about his inner turmoil. Though he had not spoken out against Duryodhana, his words carried a weight that would have far-reaching consequences for the war-torn kingdom of Hastinapur. The day of reckoning had finally arrived. The great war between the Pandavas and the Dhartarashtras was about to unfold. Sanjaya, a wise and aged sage, stood on the banks of the river Ganges watching the armies gather for battle. Bhishma, the mighty son of Santanu, led the Dhartarashtra forces into the fray. His troops formed a majestic array called Sarvatavadra, with Kripa, Kritavarman, and Sevya at their forefront. The ruler of the Sainas, Sudikshana, and Virasrevas, clad in shining mail, took up positions on the right wing. Swathaman, Samadatta, and the two princes of Avanti, accompanied by a large force, protected the left wing. Duryodhana, surrounded by the Trigarta, stood at the center of the array, ready to face the Pandavas. Bhishma's mighty Kaur warriors, Alamboshat and Srutash, took up positions in the rear, guarding the entire army from behind. Meanwhile, on the opposite side of the river, the Pandavas were forming their own array. Cain, Yudhishthira, Emesna, Necula, and Sahadeva, clad in shining mail, stood at the forefront, ready to face the enemy. Trishadyama, Virata, Sayakai, and Drupada formed a formidable phalanx. Behind them, the mighty of Abhimanyu, the Kakya brothers, and Chekatana of mighty arms also took up positions in the Pandava armies. The two armies faced each other. The air was filled with the sound of conches, drums, and cymbals. The warriors on both sides blew their horns, beat their drums, and shouted to the heavens. The earth trembled beneath their feet as they charged towards each other. Birds flew overhead, crying out in terror, while the sun itself seemed to dim in the sky. The battle had begun, and the two armies clashed with a deafening roar. Jackals howled, vultures swooped down, and dogs ran wildly across the battlefield. The sound of drums and conches grew louder still, until it was like thunder shaking the very foundations of the earth. The warriors fought on, their cries and roars mingling with the cacophony of battles. A fight raged on. The skies themselves seemed to darken as if foreboding a great calamity. Blazing meteors streaked across the sky, striking against the sun's disk and falling to earth with a deafening crash. The two armies shook like forests in a storm, their cries and roars echoing through the air. And so the battle raged on, its fury unrelenting, as if the very gods themselves had descended. In the midst of the great war of Abhimanyu, the son of Subhadra rode into the fray on his tawny steed, scattering arrows like a tempest, pouring down rain. His energy was boundless, and his prowess in battle left none untouched. With each shot, he seemed to unleash a torrent of death upon the Kaurava army, sending mighty warriors tumbling to their deaths. The Paratus reeled under his onslaught, unable to withstand the fury of Subhadra's son. Their troops, once proud and unyielding, now faltered like elephants stuck in a slough. Abhimanyu stood tall, a blazing fire without smoke, his bell flashing like lightning as he struck down foe after foe. Kauravas knew they had met their match in Abhimanyu, but Duryodhana refused to yield. He called upon the mighty Rakshasa, Alambosha, who was well versed in every science and skilled in battle. Alambosha, a terror on the field, rushed towards Abhimanyu with a roar that shook the heavens. The two enemies clashed their bows, drawing circles of light as they exchanged arrows. The air was filled with the screams of the wounded and the dying, and the earth trembled beneath their feet. Of Abhimanyu's brothers, the sons of Draupadi rushed to his aid, but even they were no match for Alambosha's ferocity. The Rakshasa pierced them with arrow after arrow, each one sharper than a battle axe, until they fell like autumn leaves before him. But the Pandava warriors refused to yield, and their leader, Arjuna's son, charged forward to confront the cannibal in a duel that would shake the very foundations of the earth. A battle raged on, with neither side giving quarter. The two enemies exchanged blows, their bows flashing like lightning as they clashed. Their eyes blazed with fury, and their movements were swift and deadly. It was as if the gods themselves had descended upon the battlefield, for in that moment nothing else existed but the clash of steel on steel. The engagement between Abhimanyu and Alambusha became a spectacle to behold, with warriors from both armies watching in awe as the two Titans clashed. Their battle was fierce and awful, like the ancient struggle between Sakra and Sambara, when gods and Asuras fought for supremacy. In that moment all else seemed forgotten. Only the clash of steel on steel remained a testament to the unyielding fury of these two warriors. The sun had barely risen over the vast expanse of the battlefield when Dhritarashtra, the blind king of Hastinapura, turned to Sanjaya, his charioteer, and confident. "Tell me, Sanjaya," he said, his voice laced with a mix of curiosity and concern, "how did Alambusha resist Abhimanyu's valiant attacks, and how did Arjuna fight against Vrishasrina's son?" Sanjaya nodded, his eyes cast downward as if collecting his thoughts. "I shall recount the tale to you, O king," he began. "Alambusha, that fearsome Rakshasa, had been waiting for Abhimanyu like a lion at the gate of its den. As soon as Abhimanyu charged towards him, Alambusha let out a thunderous roar and rushed forward, his chariot wheels pounding the ground with a deafening crash. The two warriors clashed in midair, their bows singing as they fired arrow after arrow at each other. Abhimanyu's aim was true, but Alambusha's powers of illusion allowed him to conjure up multiple versions of himself, making it difficult for Abhimanyu to track his targetus. The battle raged on. Abhimanyu invoked the solar whip on a blazing disc that illuminated the battlefield and dispelled the illusions with renewed energy. He launched a fierce counterattack, piercing Alambusha with 9 sharp shafts. But the Rakshasa was far from defeated. He conjured up another illusion, this time creating a thick darkness that enveloped the entire battlefield. Abhimanyu's eyes scanned the gloom, searching for his enemy. Suddenly, he invoked the solar weapon once more, and the universe was bathed in its radiant light. The illusions were dispelled, and Abhimanyu saw Alambusha cowering before him. With a mighty roar, Abhimanyu charged forward, covering Alambusha with a hail of arrows. But the Rakshasa's powers were still not exhausted. He conjured up one final illusion, this time creating a series of illusions that seemed to multiply the number of warriors on the battlefield. Arjuna, who had been watching from afar, now rode into the fray, his chariot wheels thundering as he approached Abhimanyu. Bhishma, Devavreya, and Drona's son Ashvatthama joined forces with Arjuna, their combined might sending Alambusha's illusions scattering. The battle raged on, with Satyaki, the grandson of Sina, clashing with Gautama, Drona's son. The two warriors exchanged blows, their arrows singing as they struck each other's armor. But in the end it was Satyaki who emerged victorious, his prowess and valor unmatched. In the midst of the great war, Dhritarashtra, the blind king of Hastinapura, sought to know about a pivotal moment in the battle where two of his most esteemed warriors, Drona and Arjuna, clashed on the battlefield. He asked Sanjaya, his trusted charioteer and advisor, to recount the tale. Sanjaya began by describing how Drona, the renowned teacher and warrior, never yielded to Arjuna in battle, just as he would not yield to any other Kshatriya. Similarly, Arjuna, the son of Pandu, did not spare his preceptor in combat, adhering strictly to the code of conduct for warriors. As Sanjaya continued, he told how Partha, with 3 swift arrows, pierced Drona's armor, but the teacher disregarded these shots and retaliated with a fierce onslaught. The battle raged on, with both warriors exchanging blows, their arrows flying through the air like cranes in autumnal skies. Just then King Duryodhana dispatched Suzarman to support Drona, while the ruler of Trigarta, fueled by rage, showed Arjuna with a profusion of iron-tipped arrows. The two warriors' prowess was unmatched as they shot arrow after arrow, each one piercing its mark. Like a bird disappearing into a laden trees, the battle intensified. By Gadata and Srutayash surrounded Bhima on all sides with their elephant division, while Duryodhana, Kripa, Aswatthama, Salya, Sudakshina, Vinda, and Yovinda, and others formed a formidable circle around Arjuna. Bhishma, the revered grandsire of the Bharatas, approached Yudhishthira with his troops surrounding him on all sides. Bhima, ever the fierce warrior, took up his mighty mass and leaped from his chariot to confront the elephant division headwanus. he descended upon them, his mass at the ready. Those elephant warriors carefully surrounded Bhishma. On all sides, stationed in their midst, Bhishma shone like the radiant sun amidst a swirling storm of clouds. With each blow he struck terror into the hearts of his enemies, consuming the elephant division, like the wind dispelling a dark mass of clouds. The mighty Bhishma wrenched out the tusks from some elephants and used them to strike others on their frontal lobes, felling them with ease. His mass smeared with gore and fought shone like Rudra's rod as he slaughtered the remaining elephants, sending them fleeing in all directions, crushing even friendly ranks in their panic. As a result of Bhishma's unyielding ferocity, Duryodhana's troops once more fled from the battlefield, abandoning their posts. The war raged on with no end in sight. The sun beat down on the battlefield as the two armies clashed in a fierce and bloody struggle. Sanjaya narrated to King Dhritarashtra the events that unfolded before his eyes. At midday, Bhishma, the mighty grandsire of the Bharatas, led the charge against the Pandavas with keen shafts. He began to consume their ranks by hundreds and thousands. The ground trembled beneath his feet as he trampled the enemy like a herd of bulls grinding. The Pandava warriors, Drishtadyumna, Sikand and Virata, and Drupada rallied together and struck Bhishma with numerous arrows, but Bhishma, unfazed by their attacks, continued to pierce them with his own arrows. He even spared Sikand, regarding him as a female. But the other warriors were not so fortunate. Drishtadyumna blazed with fury like fire, striking Bhishma with 3 shafts in his arms and chest. Drupada and Virata followed suit, piercing Bhishma with 25 and 10 arrows respectively. Sikand joined in, striking him with 25 arrows as well. Deeply pierced by the arrows, Bhishma became covered in blood, but he looked beautiful like a red oak tree variegated with flowers. Bhishma retaliated, piercing each of them with 3 straight shafts. He then cut off Drupada's bow with a broad-headed arrow. The latter took up another bow and pierced Bhishma with 5 arrows, while his charioteer fell victim to Bhishma's sharp arrows as well. Battle raged on, with the Pandavas and their allies rushing towards Ganga's son, determined to protect the Panchalas, headed by Drishtadyumna. The Kaurava army, led by Bhishma, prepared to defend themselves against the onslaught of the Pandavas. The two armies clashed in a fierce general engagement, sending car warriors falling upon each other like autumn leaves. As the battle intensified, the landscape transformed into a scene from the underworld. Cars deprived of their riders, and charioteers were dragged across the battlefield. Men, steeds, and elephants fell to the ground, crushed by the relentless onslaught of arrows and spears. The air was filled with the cries of the wounded and the dying. The river of blood flowed through the battlefield, its current swollen with the bodies of the fallen warriors. Bows obstructed its course, while hair formed its moss. Cars became its lakes and arrows. Its eddies, steeds formed its fishes, and heads severed from trunks formed its blocks of stone. The river abounded with elephants that formed its crocodiles. As the battle raged on, brave Kshatriyas, mighty car warriors, cast off all fear and sought to. The sun beat down upon the battlefield as Arjuna stood tall, his whetted shafts at the ready. He had been tasked with defeating the Kshatriyas who followed Sazarman, and he did not falter in his duty. With swift precision, he sent arrow after arrow flying towards his enemies, each one striking its mark with deadly accuracy. Sazarman himself proved to be a formidable opponent, piercing Arjuna with shafts that seemed to come from nowhere. But the Prince of Dharma was not one to be easily defeated. He countered Sazarman's attacks with ease, sending him reeling back on his chariot. And when Sazarman's troops fled in terror, Arjuna gave chase, his arrows cutting down anyone who dared stand in his way. As a battle raged on, Duryodhana and Bhishma led the charge against the Pandavas. Their army was a force to be reckoned with, but Arjuna stood firm, his Gandhava bow singing its deadly song as he unleashed arrow after arrow at the enemy. Satyaki, the brave warrior from the Vrishni clan, fought valiantly alongside him, their arrows meeting in mid-air as they clashed in a flurry of steel and dust. The earth shook beneath the hooves of the war horses as Duryodhana's troops charged forward, their banners waving high in the air. But Yudhishthira, Nakula, and Sahadeva stood firm, their chariots a wall of steel against which the enemy crashed. In vain the two armies clashed in a maelstrom of sound and fury, each side trading blows as they fought for victory. As the battle reached its peak, Bhishma stood at the forefront, his mighty form towering above the fray like a colossus. He was surrounded by the Pandavas on all sides, but Duryodhana's words echoed in his mind, "Protect our grandsire, and he will slay all the Panchalas along with the Pandavas," with a fierce determination burning within him. Bhishma rallied his troops, sending them forward against the enemy. The earth trembled as the two armies crashed together their war horses. Pounding out a rhythm on the battlefield, the air was thick with dust and a scent of sweat and blood as the warriors clashed in a frenzy of steel and fury. But amidst the chaos, one figure stood tall, Bhishma, the mighty grandsire, his heart ablaze with a fierce determination to protect his family's honor. As the battle raged on, Sanjaya watched from the sidelines, his eyes fixed upon the drama unfolding before him. He saw the bravery of the Pandavas, their unyielding spirit in the face of overwhelming odds, and he saw the fury of the Kurus, their determination to protect their grandsire at any cost. The outcome of this. The sun beat down on the battlefield as Bhishma, the Kuru grandsire, stood tall, his eyes blazing with fury. His sharp arrows flew through the air, striking their mark with unerring precision. The Parthas and their troops scattered before him, but he pursued them relentlessly, piercing Yudhishthira in the arms and chest with 12 shafts of them. The strong-willed warrior received 12 arrows himself, while Satyaki and Nakula were struck by 9 and 3 respectively. Trishtadyama, the mighty warrior, let out a thunderous roar as Bhishma's arrow pierced him. The Salvaras, Kitavas, Easterners, Westerners, Northerners, Malayavas, Abhishahas, Shurasnas, Sivas, and Vasadas all fell before Bhishma's unyielding onslaught. Their cars, elephants, and steeds lay strewn across the battlefield, broken and battered. The earth was scarred by the shattered remains of chariots, their wooden fences splintered and torn apart. The air was thick with the cries of the dying as kings from diverse lands fell to Bhishma's unrelenting arrows. Amidst this chaos, Arjuna, the Partha, stood frozen, his heart heavy with doubt. Vasudeva, the delighter of the Yadavas, urged him on, reminding him of his promise to slay all who fought against him. In battle strike now, Teja, among men, he said, or thou wilt be deprived of thy senses. Arjuna's hesitation was palpable as he looked down at his feet, unwilling to face the consequences of his actions. But Vasudeva's words struck a chord within him, and with a resolute cry, he urged his steeds forward, ready to confront Bhishma. 2 warriors clashed their bows, singing out in perfect harmony as they exchanged arrow for arrow. Vishwa's showers rained down upon Arjuna, but the Partha dodged and weaved his celestial bow, slicing through the air with deadly precision. With each exchange, the battle raged on, both warriors refusing to yield. Bhishma's bow was cut in 2 by Arjuna's sharp shafts, only for him to string another within the blink of an eye. The Partha's anger grew as he cut Bhishma's second bow, but the Kuru hero merely applauded his opponent's skill. The battle raged on, with neither side giving quarter. Vasudeva showed great skill in managing Arjuna's steeds, dodging and weaving through Bhishma's arrowed showers. The 2 warriors stood like 2 angry bulls, their beauty marred by the scratches of horns. As the fight continued, it seemed as though time itself had slowed down. The sun beat down upon them. As the sun set over the battlefield, King Yudhishthira gazed out at the carnage before him. The twilight hour had arrived, and his troops, weary from the day's fighting, began to falter. Bhishma, the mighty warrior, still rode forth with unrelenting fury, his arrows striking down anyone who dared oppose him. Yudhishthira watched in despair as his soldiers, slaughtered by Bhishma's relentless onslaught, retreated in disarray. Their once proud lines now broken and scattered, they fled in terror from the veteran warrior's wrath. The king's heart heavy with sorrow, he realized that his own forces were no match for Bhishma's unyielding ferocity. As night began to fall, Yudhishthira called a council of war with his brothers and advisors. The Vrishnis and Srinjayas gathered around him, their eyes fixed on the king as he poured out his heart in anguish. Behold, O Krishna, he said, his voice trembling, Bhishma is a raging fire that devours my troops like reeds in a forest. We dare not even look at him, for he is a force of nature, unstoppable and unyielding. Krishna, the wise and powerful prince from Dwarka, listened attentively to Yudhishthira's words, his eyes filled with compassion. He reached out to comfort the king. O son of Dharma, Krishna said gently, do not indulge in sorrow. You have Arjuna, Dhammasana, and Nakula, and Sahadeva by your side, all mighty warriors who can match Bhishma's prowess. Krishna proposed a bold plan. He would challenge Bhishma to single combat, determined to slay the veteran warrior on behalf of his friends. I will fight with Bhishma, Krishna declared, and prove my strength in battle. I will show you all that I am capable of. O King. Yudhishthira's eyes widened in amazement as he listened to Krishna's words. He knew that the prince was not exaggerating, for Krishna had vowed at Uplavya to slay Bhishma, and now he stood ready to fulfill that promise. But Yudhishthira
hesitated, recalling his earlier agreement with Bhishma. The old warrior had sworn to give him counsel, but never to fight on his behalf, O Lord. The king said, Bhishma may yet give me sovereignty by offering wise counsel. I will ask him for advice, and we will follow Akrisha. Nodded in understanding, and together they set out towards Bhishma's tent. The night air was filled with an expectant hush as the two Parshis approached the veteran warrior's quarters. Would Bhishma still offer his counsel, or would he prove too proud?
The sun had barely risen over the horizon